Hello, this is Attorney Vic Monder. Thank you for watching my YouTube channel. I wanted to talk to you all about was expungements. What are expungements? How do they have an effect on my life? How are they useful for me trying to apply for a job later on? What I would tell you, any sort of 1203.4, that's the penal code section that allows you to get into the court and file these motions. With the 1203.4 petitions for dismissals, oftentimes you have the opportunity to ask the court to reduce any felony charges that are wobbler offenses to misdemeanors before they are expunged. So you want to check, call an attorney to see whether or not your conviction itself, if it's a felony conviction, can be reduced to a misdemeanor. That's the difference of whether or not you're going to be paying a $60 application fee versus a $120 application fee. Both misdemeanors and felony cases can be expunged as long as you were granted probation, not a prison commit. If it was a prison commit, then you have to go the route of certificate of rehabilitation. If it's probation and only probation, can you petition the court for an expungement. So oftentimes, depending on how long that probation period is, how long it ran for, once it's terminated, then and only then can you file for an expungement, as long as you don't have any open new cases. So you have to be completely off of probation. If you're about 6 months away or a month away or whatever, you can also file what's called an early termination of probation with your expungement paperwork. Basically, you would file it under 1203.3, and then you would also file your 1203.4 petition with your early termination of probation in order to have the judge hear both at the same time simultaneously. Oftentimes, if the judge does grant your early termination of probation and you were successful on probation, you didn't have any offenses, didn't violate on probation, didn't pick up any new cases, then statutorily you are entitled to your expungement, and oftentimes the judges will grant those expungement requests over any sort of objection by the prosecution's office. Any sort of misdemeanor offenses, usually the statute for probation would be about 1 year, depending on the type of case it is. With the new enumerated on AB 1950, a lot of cases now that were 3-year terms of probation are now a 1-year term of probation starting January 1st, 2021. 1-year probation for most misdemeanor offenses. It excludes any statutorily required probationary periods such as DUIs, which are mandated 3-year terms, but most of them, anything else, as long as it's not statutorily mandated by our legislators, you can go ahead and request for an early termination of probation within 6 months based off of a 1-year statute of limitation or statute of probation on your case. So usually when you look at a 1-year petition, for example, if you have 1 year you're on probation and you want to file or move the court to terminate that probation early, you have to be at least halfway done with your probationary period. That's why I'm saying 6 months on a 1-year term of probation is the earliest you can petition the court. And then if the judge does grant your early termination of probation, then and only then would you be entitled to your expungement request under 1203.4. So that's something that you can do. I would encourage, as long as you're halfway completed, you completed all your programs, you paid off all your fines, everything is completely done regarding your probation. You're just waiting. You're in this waiting limbo phase of basically having the probation period terminate. Then you should also consider filing for your expungement with your early termination of probation. The only other option would be felony cases. You can file for an early termination of probation, but judges may ultimately give you the option and say, hey, I'm not going to reduce it unless the entire period is completed. Usually most plea agreements will specify if he completes the 3-year terms of probation, if that's what the deal was, for you to complete 3 years of probation, and then you're entitled to your reduction from a felony to a misdemeanor, then you may have to wait the full 3 years. You may not be eligible to come in a year and a half and ask the judge for a reduction to a misdemeanor and an early termination of probation. So it really depends on what the spirit of the agreement was when you negotiated your plea deal. If that's a request for a reduction to a misdemeanor. So if it's specified in your plea deal that you had to wait the 3 years, then you're going to have to wait the 3 years. You can't come in a year and a half and ask for an early termination of probation and then ultimately ask the judge to reduce it and expunge it. Because if the spirit of the agreement was for you to wait for 3 years and it's specified in there, then ultimately you're required to wait the 3 years. But if it's not and it's vague, then ultimately there is an argument to be made. You may be able to come in to court after a year and a half, ask the judge for the early termination of probation, and if it is granted at that point in time, then you file your expungement along with your reduction to a misdemeanor under 17b3. So there may be a couple options for you to consider when filing for these expungements. If you have questions regarding the expungement process, feel free to give me a call, 619-405-0063.